Well, hello, folks. Tony Howard here with Astrology University, and I am joined by Melanie Reinhardt to talk to you about her upcoming webinar series starting this Saturday, November 17th, called Transits of Chiron, The Healing Journey. We're really thrilled to have Melanie with us to talk about transits of Chiron. She's talked about Chiron in general in the natal chart a lot, and she's taught about transits of Chiron, but it's a topic that we get asked about all the time at Astrology University, so we're really excited to go right to one of the wonderful sources of teaching about Chiron, Melanie Reinhardt. So thanks for joining me, Melanie.
Thanks, Tony. It's a lovely opportunity to focus in on Chiron.
Awesome. So why don't you just start by telling folks a little bit about what you're going to share over the course of these three sessions. The first one starts November 17th. We have another one December 8th and January 26th. They're all being recorded. So if you catch this video on YouTube in December or January and you've missed the first two, no worries. You'll have an opportunity to log in and get those recordings and then tune into the one that's coming up next. So maybe you can just tell folks about what you're going to share. That would be great.
Okay, so as Tony said, there's three sessions. So in session one, I want to go over what it is that Chiron really brings to the horoscope. You know, what about Chiron is different than the planets, because Chiron isn't a planet in terms of the classical definition. It's a minor planet in a special category. And the more I work with it, the more I can see how it really does signify processes within the human soul that are not really signified by the other planets, specifically to do with their timing. So that's why working with transits is so incredibly interesting. And in many ways, I think it's actually the best way to learn about Chiron. In session one, I want to go over some of the astronomy and the symbology, because the way those two reflect each other is, to me, astoundingly interesting and gives us a really good feeling of what it is that the universe is speaking to us as we study Chiron. For example, Chiron was discovered in between Saturn and Uranus, and there's lots of food for thought in that, and I'll be giving some ideas about that, but you can start thinking about it if maybe you're interested in coming on the course. So with any planet, if we want to understand the transits, we need to know something about what that planet is signifying. So, you know, if it's a transit of Saturn, we need to understand something about Saturn before we can really make sense of it. Likewise with Chiron, I call it a planet just for convenience, even though I've said it's not a planet. This is where it gets very interesting. So the whole notion of the healing journey is what Chiron brings to the table. And there's a way in which we could say the whole of life is a healing journey, because without exception, everybody will experience suffering. So what is it about Chiron suffering? Because perhaps some of you watching this, you've suffered under a transit of Saturn, for example, or Pluto, or any of them. So what is it about Chiron and suffering? It's something about the way we relate to our suffering, and in what way that can become like an experience of transformation and healing, and of being taught by the process. This is what really interests me. This is also what makes it, in a way, quite difficult to speak about Chiron, because the process is so incredibly individual. So that makes it, to me, very, very inspiring. So you can't say, oh, well, when you have a transit of Chiron to, let's say, Mercury or Venus, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. Or if you've got that in your natal chart, this is what it's going to look like. It's much more individual than that. So if you have some feel for what is this healing journey business, then you'll know how to look for what is actually happening with the transits of Chiron, which just is incredibly interesting to me. And I love to present material on this because every time I do so, I'm also learning. When we look at the transits, you know, there's a question in astrology which we all ask and we all want to know. So the question is, what does this mean? Now, the thing is, with Chiron, if you train yourself to really look at your own life and look within to your own soul, and you know the astrology, you will start to see very quickly how this ties up. And so you will see for yourself the meaning of what your Chiron is about and your journey is about. And certainly the journey takes us through some very interesting territory. So session 1 will be information about Chiron, facts about Chiron, pointing up the symbology, and trying to articulate some things about what is this healing journey. Session 2, we go into the theme of the actual transits, and there's some very interesting material there, particularly about the Chiron return. So any of you who might be heading up to 50 years old, you might want to hear this because, well, I wish I'd known about this when I had my 50th birthday and my Chiron return, but I didn't yet. So that material is not in the first edition of my book. It's in the revised edition. And then in the third session, that's going to be a little different. It will start with a short guided imagery and a little debrief. And then we will also do some individual chart work and questions and answers. There will hopefully be time at the end of each session for questions and answers, but that more free-flowing and personal modality will take up the whole of session 3. There's also a good gap in between each of the sessions, and you will each receive a sheet of resources that you might want to explore that support the healing journey. And so you can really work as deeply with this material or as lightly as feels right for you. So I think that's all I have to say about the course, Tony. Thank you.
Sounds wonderful. I'm super excited. I know a lot of folks out there are. I've already had emails from people going through their Chiron return who are very excited.
Oh, okay.
So I know that there are more of you out there. So Melanie, for folks who haven't come across your work yet, could you tell folks a little bit about your approach to astrology?
Yes. So my first call to astrology, believe it or not, was in 1959. So doing the maths, astrology's been central to my life for almost 60 years. That's true.
Wow.
I love that. So because I was living in what was then Rhodesia, and we were in a state of war, and there were sanctions and all kinds of stuff going on. There was absolutely no milieu whatsoever of anybody doing the kind of things that we all have the great grace and benefit of. I found one book on astrology in the local library, and I was so curious that I was 10 years old, I immediately learned all the signs. There were no classes, no internet, no nothing. So I learned about all the signs. I knew there was more to it. And I just asked everybody from the age of 10, every single person who came into my life, I asked them when their birthday was.
Wow.
When I went to university, I went down to South Africa, to Cape Town. And there were a few of this kind of book available. So my first big aha was Dane Rudjar's book, The Pulse of Life. So by then I was well into observing and so forth, and this began to add the depth. So long story short, after 15 years of being a very curious, passionate solo student, I began to formalize my learning and to study how to, calculate charts and so forth. And I got myself from that zero place up to being able to work professionally and read charts without ever attending a class or having a teacher.
Wow.
I'm not recommending that, but
Right.
it just wasn't available in the places that I lived.
Right.
So I have Mercury retrograde in Gemini in the 8th house. And so I tend to do everything backwards, okay? So I was already professional for several years before I then studied with the Faculty of Astrological Studies, a move which I never regretted for a moment. And I've been involved teaching with the faculty down the years as well. And it's delightful to have that whole astrology community, which I didn't have when I was learning. So I learned almost entirely on my own. And as I say, I'm not recommending that, but those resources just weren't around. And I love it that they are around now. I still attend classes, I go to courses. I love talking astrology with my colleagues and so forth. And I think we're all very fortunate.
Yes, definitely. That's a great story. And there are still people out there who, even though that we have access to so much information, there are a lot of people out there who still study on their own. And
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we do what we do at Astrology University, is to try to create an environment where people can get a sense of community or step into the community as much or as little as they like. And but to provide that access and resource for people. So but there is something to be said for what happens when you're in a situation like you were in, where you have to just learn it on your own. And it sounds like you were so motivated to do so. And
Yeah, I was.
and you really had the will to sort of do your own testing and study as well in the moment with real people. And boy,
Yeah.
you just learned so much from that. So that's really great. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I guess the Mercury in Gemini likes both. I like to be a hermit and to really study on my own and to really think my own thoughts. And I love to exchange ideas with other people and go to their talks and lectures and so forth. It's a huge pleasure to me.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Me too, for sure. Well, thanks, Melanie, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to chat with
Oh,
us.
it's a pleasure, Tony, really.
And I hope that we see some of you for the live sessions. And if not, we'll catch you on the recordings. And we'll see you very soon. So head over to Astrology University if you would like to register. You can find graphics for this on the homepage. If you're tuning into this after the webinar series is done, you can just head over to the shop and search for Melanie's name, and you will find access to these recordings. So thanks again, folks, and we'll see you very soon. And thanks again, Melanie.
Thanks. Bye.